Starving kitten found on the road. What the driver does next changes everything. How will this story unfold? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the quiet countryside road. The air was still, interrupted only by the soft hum of an engine as a car meandered down the winding path. Behind the wheel sat David, a middle-aged man with a weathered face and kind eyes that hinted at a life filled with both joys and regrets. He had taken many times before, a peaceful detour on his way home from work. It was his favorite part of the day, a chance to escape the noise and chaos of the city. David tapped his fingers on the steering wheel in rhythm with the music playing softly from the radio. The road stretched ahead of him, flanked by tall trees and patches of wildflowers swaying gently in the breeze. It was the kind of scene that might have felt idyllic under different circumstances, but today, David's mind was elsewhere. Life had been difficult lately. The recent loss of his beloved dog Max had left a void in his heart that nothing seemed to fill. Max had been his companion for over a decade, a constant source of comfort and joy. Now the house felt unbearably empty, the silence a stark contrast to the lively barks and wagging tail that had once greeted him every evening. David sighed, his grip on the steering wheel tightening as a wave of grief washed over him. He had promised himself he wouldn't get another pet. It was too painful, too much of a reminder of what he had lost. But even as he told himself this, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. As he rounded a bend in the road, something caught his eye. At first, he thought it was a pile of leaves or a scrap of fabric, but as he drew closer, he realized it was moving. He slowed the car, his brows furrowing in concern. The small, frail shape lay in the middle of the road, its movements weak and erratic. David pulled over to the side of the road, his heart pounding. He stepped out of the car, the warm breeze rustling his hair as he approached the tiny creature. It was a kitten, no more than a few weeks old, its fur matted and dirty, its ribs visible beneath its thin frame. The kitten let out a feeble meow, its voice barely more than a whisper. David knelt down, his eyes filled with both sadness and uncertainty. The kitten's eyes were half closed, its tiny body trembling with exhaustion. It looked as though it had been abandoned, left to fend for itself in a world that had no mercy for the weak. "Hey there, little one," David said softly, his voice barely audible over the gentle rustling of the trees. He reached out a hand, careful not to startle the kitten. It flinched slightly at his touch but didn't have the strength to move away. David's heart ached at the sight. He glanced around, hoping to see a mother cat or perhaps another kitten nearby, but the road was empty. It was just him in this fragile life, stranded in the middle of nowhere. He hesitated, his mind racing with questions. What was he supposed to do? He wasn't prepared for this. He didn't have the supplies, the knowledge, or even the emotional capacity to take on another responsibility. But as he looked into the kitten's eyes, he knew he couldn't leave it there. Something about the tiny creature stirred a part of him he thought he had lost, a part that cared deeply, that wanted to protect and nurture. Max's memory loomed large in his mind, and for a moment he felt as though his old friend was guiding him, urging him to act. David took a deep breath and gently scooped the kitten into his hands. Its body was so light, so fragile, that he was afraid he might hurt it just by holding it. "It's okay," he murmured, cradling the kitten against his chest. "I've got you." He carried the kitten back to his car, carefully placing it on the passenger seat. The kitten curled up instinctively, its tiny body trembling as it let out another weak meow. David rummaged through his car, searching for anything that might help. He found an old water bottle and a clean rag, which he used to create a makeshift bed for the kitten. As he started the car, David's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Where could he take the kitten? Was there a vet nearby? Would it even survive the journey? He glanced at the tiny creature beside him, its breathing shallow but steady. "Hang in there, little one," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "We'll figure this out." The drive back to town felt longer than usual, every bump in the road making David wince as he worried about the kitten's condition. He kept glancing over at it, his heart sinking every time he saw its frail body lying motionless on the makeshift bed. He couldn't help but wonder what kind of life it had led up until now, what hardships it had faced to end up here on this lonely road. As he approached the outskirts of town, David remembered a small animal clinic he had passed a few times on his way to work. He hadn't paid much attention to it before, but now it seemed like his best option. He turned the car in that direction, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The clinic was a modest building with a faded sign that read, "Sunny Paws Animal Care." David pulled into the parking lot and quickly stepped out of the car, the kitten cradled in his hands. The door jingled as he entered, the cool air inside a stark contrast to the warmth of the afternoon sun. A young woman behind the counter looked up, her expression softening as she saw the kitten in David's hands. "Oh no," she said, her voice filled with concern. "What happened?" "I found it on the road," David explained, his voice shaky. "I don't know how long it's been out there, but it's in bad shape." The woman nodded, her movements swift and purposeful as she led him to an examination room. "We'll take care of it," she said, her tone reassuring. "You did the right thing bringing it here." David watched as the woman gently took the kitten from his hands, her touch careful and practiced. A veterinarian entered the room moments later, his expression calm but focused. He examined the kitten thoroughly, his hands moving with precision as he checked its vital signs. "It's dehydrated and malnourished," the vet said finally, his voice steady. "But it's a fighter. With some care, it has a good chance of pulling through." David exhaled, the weight of his worry lifting slightly. "What can I do?" he asked, his voice filled with determination. The vet glanced at him, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "For now, let us stabilize it. Once it's strong enough, you can decide what comes next." David nodded, his heart swelling with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. He looked down at the kitten, its tiny body resting on the examination table. "You're going to be okay," he whispered, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "I'll make sure of it." David sat in the small waiting area of the clinic, his hands resting on his knees as he stared at the door to the examination room. The room was quiet, save for the faint hum of an air conditioner and the occasional sound of footsteps from the staff. The minutes felt like hours as he waited, his mind racing with questions. Would the kitten survive? What if it didn't? And if it did, what would he do next? He glanced around the room, his eyes settling on a bulletin board covered in photos of pets that had been rescued and adopted through the clinic. Each picture told a story, each face a testament to the transformative power of kindness. A part of him wondered if the kitten would end up on that board someday, its tiny face a symbol of resilience and hope. The door to the examination room opened, and the veterinarian stepped out, his expression calm but serious. David stood immediately, his heart pounding. "How is it?" he asked, his voice tinged with both fear and hope. The vet gave a reassuring nod. "The kitten's stable for now. It's severely dehydrated and malnourished, but we've given it fluids and some special food to help it regain its strength. It's going to need a lot of care, but I think it has a good chance." David let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Relief washed over him, but was quickly replaced by a new sense of responsibility. "What kind of care?" he asked, his voice steady despite the uncertainty he felt. The vet gestured for him to follow, leading him back into the examination room. The kitten lay on a soft blanket inside a small crate, its tiny body curled up as it slept. Its breathing was slow but steady, a stark contrast to the frailty David had seen earlier. "For now, it needs rest and nourishment," the vet explained. "You'll need to feed it small amounts of formula several times a day. Keep it warm and monitor its condition closely." David nodded, his eyes fixed on the kitten. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said quietly. The vet studied him for a moment, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You don't have to decide right now," he said gently. "We can keep the kitten here for observation, and if you're not able to take it home, we can look for someone who can." David hesitated, his gaze lingering on the tiny creature. He thought about Max, about the emptiness that had consumed him since his dog's passing. And then he thought about the moment he had found the kitten on the road, the way it had looked at him with those pleading eyes. He couldn't walk away, not now, not after everything. "I'll take it," he said finally, his voice firm. "I'll take care of it." The vet nodded, his expression approving. "All right, we'll give you everything you need to get started. And if you have any questions or concerns, you can call us anytime." An hour later, David left the clinic with a small box in his hands, the kitten nestled inside on a bed of soft towels. The staff had provided him with a bag of supplies, formula, a tiny bottle, and instructions for how to care for the kitten. As he walked to his car, he felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. He had never cared for a kitten before, and the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders. The drive home was quiet, the soft sound of the kitten's breathing barely audible over the hum of the engine. David glanced at the box beside him, his heart swelling with a mix of emotions. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't let this tiny life slip away. When he arrived home, the house felt different. The emptiness that had plagued him since Max's passing was still there, but it was no longer as suffocating. There was a sense of purpose now, a reason to keep going. He carried the box inside and set it down gently on the kitchen counter. "Welcome home," he said softly, lifting the kitten out of the box and cradling it in his hands. The kitten stirred slightly, its tiny paws twitching as it let out a faint meow. David smiled, his heart melting at the sound. "You're safe now." He set up a small corner of the living room as the kitten's new space, lining a cardboard box with soft towels and placing a heating pad underneath to keep it warm. He filled a small bowl with water and prepared a bottle of formula, following the instructions the clinic had given him. As he held the bottle to the kitten's mouth, it began to suckle weakly, its tiny body trembling with effort. David watched in awe, his hands steady as he fed the kitten. It was so small, so fragile, yet it clung to life with a determination that inspired him. He thought about all the times he had felt like giving up, about the days when the grief over Max had been too much to bear. And yet here he was, holding this tiny creature that refused to let go. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was still hope. Over the next few days, David settled into a routine. He woke up early to feed the kitten, checking its progress carefully and ensuring it stayed warm and comfortable. He spent hours sitting beside its makeshift bed, talking to it in soft tones as it slowly gained strength. The kitten's appetite improved, its movements becoming less sluggish as it explored its surroundings with cautious curiosity. David found himself smiling more often, the weight of his grief lifting with each passing day. The kitten became a source of joy and purpose, its tiny meows filling the silence that had once felt so oppressive. He hadn't realized how much he needed this, how much he needed something to care for, something to remind him that life could still be beautiful. One afternoon, as David sat on the couch with a kitten curled up in his lap, he found himself reflecting on how much his life had changed in such a short time. He thought about the moment he had found the kitten on the road, about the decision to stop and help. It had been an act of compassion, a simple choice to care for another living being. But in doing so, he had also saved himself. The kitten stirred, its tiny body stretching as it let out a soft purr. David chuckled, gently stroking its fur. "You're a fighter," he said, his voice filled with affection. "Just like Max was." The mention of Max brought a pang of sadness, but it was different now. The grief was still there, but it no longer felt like a weight he couldn't carry. Instead, it was a part of him, a reminder of the love he had shared with his old friend. And now that love was finding a new home in the tiny heart of this kitten. As the days turned into weeks, the kitten continued to grow stronger. Its fur became soft and glossy, its tiny frame filling out as it gained weight. It began to explore the house, its curiosity leading it into every corner and crevice. David found himself laughing at its antics, his heart warming every time it looked up at him with those wide, trusting eyes. He named the kitten Hope. It seemed fitting, given everything they had been through together. Hope had brought light back into his life, filling the emptiness with joy and purpose. And as he watched her curl up in a patch of sunlight on the living room floor, he knew he had made the right choice. Hope wasn't just a kitten. She was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was always a chance for something beautiful to grow. As the weeks passed, Hope's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The once starving kitten David had found on the road had blossomed into a lively, curious bundle of energy. Her fur, now sleek and soft, shimmered in the sunlight as she darted from one corner of the house to another, chasing invisible prey and batting at anything that moved. David often found himself laughing at her antics, his heart lighter than it had been in months. Hope's favorite spot was the windowsill in the living room, where she would perch for hours, her small body pressed against the glass as she watched the world outside. Birds fluttered past, and leaves swayed in the wind, each movement captivating her. David would sometimes sit beside her, watching her wide eyes follow the flutter of wings or the rustle of the trees. It was a simple joy, but it reminded him of the beauty in the small things he had once overlooked. David's routine had changed entirely. His mornings were now spent ensuring Hope had her breakfast and plenty of fresh water before he headed to work. His evenings were filled with playtime, soft meows, and the soothing sound of her purring as she curled up in his lap. The emptiness that had once consumed his home was gone, replaced by the warmth and life that Hope brought. But the most surprising change was the one within David himself. Before Hope, he had been weighed down by grief, his days a monotonous cycle of work and solitude. Max's loss had left him feeling as though he would never find joy again. But Hope had changed that. She had reminded him of what it meant to care for something, to love and be loved in return. One day, as David sat on the couch with Hope sprawled across his lap, a thought struck him. He had saved her life, but in many ways, she had saved his too. The kitten had given him a reason to wake up each morning, a purpose that had been missing for far too long. She had brought him back to life in a way he hadn't thought possible. Hope stretched, her tiny paws reaching out as she let out a contented purr. David chuckled, scratching behind her ears. "You're a miracle, you know that," he said softly. Hope blinked up at him, her green eyes shining with trust and affection. It was moments like these that made everything worth it, the sleepless nights, the worry, and the responsibility. David's friends and family had noticed the change in him as well. His sister, Emily, had been the first to comment on it. "You're different," she had said during a phone call. "Happier, lighter. What's going on?" David had told her about Hope, his voice filled with pride and affection as he recounted the story of how he had found her on the road. Emily had been amazed. "That's incredible," she had said. "It's like she came into your life exactly when you needed her." David couldn't argue with that. Hope had arrived during one of his darkest moments, and she had brought light with her. She had given him something he hadn't realized he was searching for, a sense of purpose, a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness could change everything. But caring for Hope wasn't without its challenges. There were nights when she would wake him with her playful meows, demanding attention when all he wanted was sleep. There were moments when she would knock over a glass of water or claw at the furniture, her mischievous nature testing his patience. But even in those moments, David couldn't stay frustrated for long. Hope's presence was a gift, and he cherished every second of it. One evening, as David prepared dinner, he heard a loud crash from the living room. He rushed in to find Hope sitting on the floor, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. Beside her lay the shattered remains of a ceramic vase that had once belonged to his grandmother. David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Hope," he said, his voice stern but not angry. "What am I going to do with you?" Hope tilted her head, letting out a soft meow as if to apologize. David shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. He crouched down to clean up the mess, Hope watching him with a curious expression. "You're lucky you're so cute," he muttered, glancing at her. She purred in response, her tiny body pressing against his leg in a gesture of affection. Moments like these reminded David of the unpredictability of life with a pet. It wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. Hope had a way of making even the most frustrating moments feel meaningful, her playful spirit a constant source of joy. As the days turned into months, David and Hope settled into a comfortable rhythm. The kitten grew stronger and more confident, her once fragile body now full of life and energy. She explored every inch of the house, turning even the smallest spaces into her playground. David often found her curled up in the oddest places, inside a laundry basket, on top of the refrigerator, or nestled among the cushions on the couch. One sunny afternoon, David decided to take Hope outside for the first time. He had purchased a small harness and leash, wanting to ensure she would be safe as she explored the world beyond the walls of his home. Hope had been skeptical at first, batting at the harness with her paws as David tried to put it on her. But once they stepped outside, her curiosity took over. The backyard was a world of wonders for Hope. She sniffed at the grass, her nose twitching as she discovered new scents. She pounced on a leaf that fluttered in the breeze, her tiny body wriggling with excitement. David watched her with a smile, his heart swelling at the sight. It was a simple moment, but it was one he would treasure forever. As the sun began to set, casting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Hope climbed onto David's lap, her small body warm against his. He stroked her fur, his mind drifting back to the day he had found her on the road. She had been so fragile, so close to giving up, and yet here she was, a vibrant, joyful presence that had transformed his life. David looked down at her, his hand resting gently on her back. "You're a fighter," he said softly, "and you've taught me to fight too." Hope purred, her eyes closing as she drifted off to sleep. In that moment, David realized just how much she had changed him. She had reminded him of the power of kindness, of the importance of never giving up. She had shown him that even the smallest lives could have the biggest impact. That night, As David lay in bed with Hope curled up beside him, he thought about the future. He didn't know what it held, but he knew one thing for certain: Hope would be a part of it. She had become more than just a pet. She was family, a symbol of everything he had overcome and everything he still hoped to achieve. As he drifted off to sleep, David felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The road ahead was uncertain, but with Hope by his side, he knew he could face whatever came his way. Together, they had found something beautiful, a bond that had changed them both forever. The weeks turned into months, and Hope continued to thrive under David's care. Her playful personality blossomed even further, and her once tiny frame had grown into that of a healthy, spirited young cat. She darted through the house like a whirlwind, her boundless energy leaving David laughing and chasing after her. Every corner of the home now bore evidence of her presence: scattered toys, scratch marks on the furniture, and small tufts of fur that seemed to appear no matter how often David cleaned. Despite the chaos, David wouldn't have had it any other way. Hope had become the heart of his home, filling the empty spaces with life and joy. Her purring became the soundtrack of his evenings, and her antics were a constant source of entertainment. She had brought light into his life during a time when everything had felt dark and heavy. One evening, David sat at his desk, typing away on his laptop as Hope curled up on the chair beside him. She had a habit of keeping him company while he worked, her soft presence a reminder of the companionship he had once thought he'd lost forever. As he glanced at her sleeping form, thought crossed his mind. He hadn't truly realized how much she had changed his life until now. His sister Emily had been right. Hope had come into his life exactly when he needed her. The bond they shared was something he hadn't expected, but it was exactly what he had been missing. Max's loss had left a hole in his heart, but Hope had helped to fill it in a way that felt both healing and transformative. As David worked, his phone buzzed on the desk. He picked it up to find a text from Emily. "How's Hope doing? Send me a picture when you can." David smiled, turning to snap a photo of the sleeping cat. She looked peaceful, her tiny paws tucked beneath her body as she dozed. He sent the photo to Emily, adding the caption, "She's the queen of the house now." Emily replied almost immediately, "She's adorable. You're so lucky to have found each other." David stared at the message for a moment, his thoughts drifting back to the day he had found Hope on the road. It had been such a small moment, an impulsive decision to stop and help, but it had changed everything. He wondered what would have happened if he hadn't stopped, if he had driven past her without a second thought. The idea sent a chill through him. Hope stirred, her green eyes blinking open as she stretched and let out a small meow. David reached over to scratch behind her ears, his smile widening as she purred in response. "I'm the lucky one," he said softly. "You've done more for me than I could ever do for you." As the days passed, David began to notice something extraordinary. It wasn't just his life that was changing, Hope was changing too. She had become more confident, more curious, and even more loving. She followed him from room to room, her tail held high as she demanded attention with soft meows and playful nudges. She had a knack for sensing his moods, curling up beside him when he felt low, and bringing him her favorite toy when she sensed he needed a distraction. One particularly rainy afternoon, David found himself sitting on the couch, staring out the window as the rain poured down. It was one of those days when memories of Max crept up on him, the ache of loss lingering in the corners of his mind. Hope, as if sensing his sadness, climbed into his lap and pressed her small body against his chest. She purred loudly, her warmth and affection pulling him out of his thoughts. David wrapped his arms around her, his heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, Hope," he whispered, "for everything." The rain continued to fall, but the heaviness in David's chest began to lift. Hope had a way of making everything feel a little brighter, a little more bearable. She was his anchor, his reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was always a reason to keep going. As Hope grew, David began to introduce her to the world outside their home. The small backyard became her playground, a place where she could chase butterflies, climb trees, and bask in sunlight. David would sit on the porch, watching her explore with the wide-eyed curiosity that only a young cat could have. One sunny morning, as Hope pounced on a stray leaf, David couldn't help but marvel at how far she had come. The frail, starving kitten he had found on the road was now a strong, vibrant cat with a zest for life that was contagious. She had transformed not just herself, but him as well. Hope's adventures in the backyard became a daily ritual. She would dart after bugs, leap onto low branches, and sprawl out in the grass, her eyes half closed in contentment. David often joined her, bringing a book or a cup of coffee as he sat on the porch. It was their time together, a quiet reminder of the bond they shared. But Hope's presence didn't just change David's home life. It began to affect his relationships as well. His sister Emily, who had always been close to him, started visiting more often, eager to see Hope and spend time with her brother. Even David's neighbors, who had once been little more than acquaintances, began to stop by to ask about the cat they had seen playing in the yard. "She's beautiful," one neighbor said, watching Hope bat at a butterfly with her paw. "You're lucky to have her." David smiled, nodding. "I am. She's changed my life." The neighbor chuckled. "Funny how animals have a way of doing that, isn't it?" David couldn't agree more. Hope had brought people into his life, strengthened his connections, and given him a sense of community he hadn't realized he was missing. She was more than just a pet. She was a bridge, a way for him to reconnect with the world around him. One evening, as David sat on the couch with Hope curled up beside him, he thought about the future. He had spent so long stuck in the past, mourning what he had lost, that he had forgotten how to look forward. But now, with Hope by his side, the future didn't seem so daunting. It felt full of possibility, of new adventures and unexpected joys. David picked up his phone and opened his photo gallery, scrolling through the pictures he had taken of Hope over the past few months. Each photo told a story: Hope napping on the windowsill, pouncing on a toy, basking in the sunlight. He smiled as he reached the first photo he had taken, the one of her lying on the road, fragile and afraid. He couldn't believe how far they had come. Hope had been a tiny, helpless kitten when he found her, but now she was a symbol of resilience and love. She had reminded him of the power of compassion, the importance of never giving up, and the beauty of second chances. As Hope stretched and nestled closer to him, David felt a deep sense of contentment. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: whatever came next, they would face it together. Hope had given him more than he could ever repay. She had shown him that even the smallest lives could make the biggest impact, and for that, he would always be grateful. The bond between David and Hope deepened with every passing day. What had started as a moment of compassion on a quiet road had blossomed into a profound partnership that transformed both their lives. Hope's playful energy and affectionate nature became the cornerstone of David's daily routine, and he found himself looking forward to every morning and evening spent with her. One morning, as David prepared his coffee in the kitchen, he heard the familiar sound of Hope's tiny paws patting across the floor. She leapt onto the counter effortlessly, her bright green eyes fixed on him as she let out a soft meow. David chuckled, reaching over to scratch behind her ears. "Good morning, princess," he said warmly. "What trouble are you planning to get into today?" Hope tilted her head, her whiskers twitching as if she were plotting something mischievous. David had learned to recognize that look. Sure enough, as soon as his back was turned, she reached out a paw to swipe at the teaspoon sitting on the counter. It clattered to the floor, and Hope immediately hopped down to investigate her handiwork. David shook his head, laughing. "You're incorrigible," he said, bending down to pick up the spoon. Hope purred, weaving between his legs as though she knew she could get away with anything. And she could. David had long since given up trying to keep a straight face when it came to her antics. Later that day, David decided to take Hope on another adventure in the backyard. The weather was perfect, warm and sunny with a gentle breeze that rustled the leaves. He carefully strapped her harness on, which Hope tolerated with a resigned expression, and opened the back door. The moment her paws touched the grass, she was off, darting toward her favorite spot beneath the big oak tree. David followed her, carrying a cup of iced tea as he settled into a lawn chair nearby. He watched as Hope pounced on a stray leaf, her tail flicking with excitement. Her joy was infectious, and David found himself smiling without even realizing it. This was his favorite part of the day, watching Hope explore the world with unbridled curiosity. As Hope climbed onto a low-hanging branch, David's thoughts drifted to the moment he had found her on the road. It was a memory that had stayed with him, vivid and raw. He could still see the frail, trembling kitten lying in the middle of the pavement, her eyes filled with fear and desperation. He had stopped without hesitation, but at the time, he hadn't realized just how significant that decision would be. Hope had given him more than just companionship. She had taught him lessons he hadn't known he needed to learn, lessons about resilience, kindness, and the power of small actions. She had reminded him that even the most fragile lives could hold incredible strength, and that the simplest acts of love could have the greatest impact. David's reflection was interrupted by a loud chirp. He looked up to see a bird perched on a nearby branch, its head tilted as it watched Hope with curiosity. Hope froze, her body tense as she crouched low, her eyes locked onto the bird. David held his breath, wondering what she would do. Hope pounced, leaping onto the branch with surprising agility. The bird took off with a startled flutter, and Hope landed gracefully, looking thoroughly pleased with herself. David laughed, shaking his head. "Nice try, Hope," he called out. "You're not quite a hunter yet." Hope meowed in response, as though protesting his remark, before making her way back down the tree. She trotted over to David, her tail held high, and leapt onto his lap. David set his iced tea aside and stroked her fur, his heart swelling with affection. "You're a wild one, aren't you?" he said softly. "But you've got a good heart." The afternoon passed peacefully, the two of them enjoying the simple pleasures of the outdoors. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, David carried Hope back inside. She settled onto the windowsill, her favorite spot, and watched the world outside as the day turned to dusk. That evening, as David prepared dinner, he thought about how much his life had changed since Hope had entered it. He had never expected a tiny, helpless kitten to have such a profound impact on him, but she had. She had brought him out of his grief, given him a reason to wake up each morning, and reminded him of the beauty in the world around him. After dinner, David sat on the couch with Hope curled up beside him. He reached for his phone and began scrolling through the photos he had taken of her over the past few months. Each one told a story, Hope playing in the backyard, napping in the sunlight, or curled up in his lap. The transformation was incredible. The frail kitten he had found on the road was now a vibrant, healthy cat with a personality larger than life. As he scrolled, David came across a photo of Max. His heart ached for a moment, the familiar pang of loss washing over him. But it was different now. The grief wasn't as sharp, the pain not as overwhelming. It was still there, but it had softened, becoming a quiet reminder of the love he had shared with his old friend. David looked down at Hope, who was purring softly in her sleep. She had filled the void Max had left in a way he hadn't thought possible. She hadn't replaced him, no one ever could, but she had given him a new kind of love, one that was just as meaningful and transformative. That night, as David lay in bed with Hope curled up at his feet, he thought about the future. He didn't know what it held, but he felt ready to face it. Hope had taught him that life was full of surprises, both good and bad, and that it was worth embracing every moment, no matter how uncertain. Before he drifted off to sleep, David whispered softly, "Thank you, Hope, for everything." The next morning, David woke to the sound of Hope's playful meows. She was perched on his chest, her green eyes wide with excitement as she pawed at his arm. All right, he said with a laugh, sitting up. "Let's start the day." As he went about his morning routine, David couldn't help but marvel at how much his life had changed. Hope had brought him back to life in a way he hadn't thought possible. She had reminded him of the power of compassion, the importance of resilience, and the beauty of second chances. And as he watched her dart through the house, her tail held high and her eyes full of mischief, he knew one thing for certain. Hope had given him something he hadn't realized he was missing. She had given him a reason to believe in the goodness of the world, a reason to keep going, and a reason to smile every single day. As the days turned into weeks and then months, David realized that Hope had not only changed his life but had also become the centerpiece of it. Her antics, her warmth, and her resilience were now the driving force of his days. Every morning started with her soft meows waking him up, and every evening ended with her purring quietly beside him. She had become his family, his constant companion, and a symbol of the second chance they both had taken a leap of faith on. One crisp autumn morning, David decided to take Hope on an adventure. She had grown bolder with her backyard explorations, and he thought it was time to expand her horizons. He had read about a pet-friendly park not far from his home and decided it would be the perfect place for Hope to explore safely. He secured her harness and leash, packed a small bag with water and treats, and headed out. Hope seemed intrigued by the car ride, her head poking out of the carrier as she looked at the world zipping by. When they arrived at the park, her ears perked up at the sound of birds chirping and leaves rustling in the breeze. David set her down gently, and Hope sniffed the air, her tail flicking with curiosity. The park was alive with activity. Dogs played fetch, families strolled along the paths, and the vibrant colors of autumn leaves blanketed the ground. Hope stepped cautiously at first, her paws crunching softly on the fallen leaves. But as she grew more comfortable, her steps became more confident, her tail swaying as she explored. David walked beside her, holding the leash loosely as she led the way. She stopped to sniff at flowers, batted at a stray leaf, and even watched a squirrel dart up a tree with wide-eyed fascination. David couldn't help but smile at her wonder. Seeing the world through her eyes made everything feel fresh and new, as though he were rediscovering the beauty of life alongside her. They found a quiet spot beneath a large oak tree, and David spread out a blanket. Hope curled up beside him, her small body pressed against his leg as she purred contentedly. David leaned back, gazing up at the golden leaves swaying gently in the breeze. It was a peaceful moment, one that reminded him of how far they had come. "You've changed everything, you know that," he said softly, scratching behind Hope's ears. She blinked up at him, her green eyes filled with trust and affection. "I thought I was saving you that day, but the truth is you saved me too." As the afternoon wore on, David watched Hope explore the area around their blanket, her movements graceful and curious. She was a picture of resilience, a living reminder of the power of love and compassion. The frail kitten he had found on the road was now a confident, vibrant cat, and he couldn't be prouder. When they returned home that evening, Hope settled onto her favorite spot on the windowsill, watching the world outside as the sun dipped below the horizon. David sat nearby, sipping a cup of tea as he reflected on the day. The park had been a small adventure, but it felt monumental. It was a testament to how far they had come, both individually and together. That night, as David prepared for bed, he found himself scrolling through photos on his phone. There were countless pictures of Hope now, her napping in the sunlight, playing with her toys, or perched on the windowsill with her tail curled around her. Each image was a snapshot of their journey, a story of survival, healing, and love. One photo in particular caught his eye. It was the very first picture he had taken of Hope back when she was lying on the road. Her tiny body had been so frail, her fur matted and dirty, her eyes dull with exhaustion. David felt a lump form in his throat as he compared it to a recent photo of her sitting proudly in the backyard, her fur sleek and her eyes shining with life. The transformation was incredible. Hope was a fighter, a survivor, and a symbol of the power of kindness. She had taught him that even the smallest acts of compassion could change the course of a life, and that sometimes it was the smallest lives that held the greatest lessons. The following week, David received an invitation from the animal clinic where he had first taken Hope. They were hosting an event to celebrate rescue animals and their stories, and they wanted David and Hope to attend. He hesitated at first. Hope wasn't used to large gatherings, but the idea of sharing their story felt important. On the day of the event, David dressed in a comfortable shirt and jeans, carefully securing Hope's harness before placing her in her carrier. She meowed softly, her curiosity evident as he carried her to the car. The drive to the clinic felt surreal, as though they were coming full circle. The clinic was bustling with activity when they arrived. There were booths set up with information about pet care, adoption stories being shared, and volunteers handing out treats and toys. David carried Hope through the crowd, her wide eyes taking in the sights and sounds. Their turn to speak came toward the end of the event. David stood on a small stage, Hope perched in his arms as he addressed the crowd. He shared the story of how he had found her on the road, of the decision to stop and help, and of the incredible journey they had taken together since that day. "She may be small, but she's taught me some of the biggest lessons in life," David said, his voice steady but emotional. "Hope reminded me of the power of kindness, the importance of resilience, and the beauty of second chances. She's not just a pet, she's my family." The crowd erupted into applause, and Hope let out a soft meow as though she understood the significance of the moment. David smiled, holding her close as he stepped off the stage. People approached him afterward, sharing their own stories of rescue and love. It was a reminder that their journey wasn't unique. There were countless others who had experienced the transformative power of compassion. As the event wound down, David and Hope returned home, both of them tired but content. Hope climbed onto the windowsill as usual, her green eyes watching the world outside as the stars began the night sky. David sat beside her, his heart full as he reflected on the day. "You're a star, you know that," he said softly, scratching behind her ears. Hope purred in response, leaning into his touch. She was more than just a kitten he had rescued. She was a reminder of everything good in the world, a beacon of hope in his darkest moments. That night, as David lay in bed with Hope curled up beside him, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. Their journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every challenge, every sleepless night, and every moment of uncertainty. Hope had given him a reason to believe in the goodness of life again, and for that, he would always be thankful. As he drifted off to sleep, David whispered, "Thank you, Hope, for changing everything." And somewhere in the quiet of the night, Hope purred softly, her tiny heart beating in rhythm with his.